And we're live on YouTube. Hello, YouTube friends. We are doing office hours. I missed last week because I had a family thing. So I think we've got a couple queued up, but actually it doesn't look like it's super busy. So if you do have questions, this week would be a great week to ask those questions. Let me just grab this YouTube link and share it on Discord. And actually, let me share my screen also. So I totally ignore the YouTube chat and everything. I'm not here for YouTube. YouTube is here for me as a place for me to put this video recording. I do everything through Discord. So you can go to kcd.im/Discord and that will take you straight to the Discord. I also have the office hours page. You'll find links to everything there. Yeah, this is just your opportunity to ask me questions about anything my content or otherwise. And yeah, I focus on the people who are actually in the Zoom meeting. And when we run out of questions in the Zoom meeting, then we go over to Discord to answer questions that are in there. I kind of expect that maybe some people didn't realize that daylight savings happened. And so this is happening an hour earlier than it used to. So we'll see how busy it is today. But yeah, I'll go ahead and stop talking. Anybody in the Zoom have questions that they want answered? And I feel free to interrupt me if you're in the Zoom and you want to have questions answered. I'm going to scroll up and find where I was when right here, when I finished answering questions and see if I can find any other answers or any other questions. Okay, answered that one. Yeah, there were a couple that I was able to just answer really quick. So we'll skip over this. And Peter answered that one. And that was when I said we're not doing office hours last week. Okay, here we go. Here's a question I don't think was answered from Gabriel. Yeah, that's probably how you say that. While studying about generators and iterators in JavaScript, I understood the advantages of using them to handle side effects since we have more control over the function return values. However, I didn't get the idea why Redux Saga implements it on their sagas for async API calls. Can anyone help me understand? I'm afraid I can't. I know there are use cases for generators and they're really good at some things, but I have never had a situation where I was like, oh, I'll use a generator. It just seems like a great way to make code more confusing. Or maybe it's just because they're unfamiliar to me. But yeah, so I can't really help you with that one because I just never thought that generators made code more simple. And so I don't have very much experience with them. The only experience that I have with generators are from my ES6 workshop where I show them because they're ES6, but also I use them for building a custom iterator to show the use case for symbol.iterator. So you can do like spread and rest spread syntax and stuff. So, and for of, I think. So yeah, sorry, that's not super helpful, but I don't promise to be helpful. I just promise to try and answer to the best that I can. So sorry about that. I'm just very limited and I don't want to like misguide you or anything. As far as Redux Saga, this is one of the reasons I was never interested in Redux Saga because I just, this and one other reason, but yeah, I just thought using generators made things more complicated. And Redux Thunk wasn't my favorite, but it was, I thought, more straightforward. The other reason I didn't like Redux Saga was the way that they tell you to write your tests are basically my code does what it does. Like it doesn't, they weren't very useful tests. Like they were really easy to write, which is the reason that people loved them, but they didn't really provide any value. So that also made me think, oh, maybe Redux Saga is not what I want to do. If you're using Redux Saga and you're happy with it, that's great. Just because I didn't like it doesn't mean that it's not useful. Okay. Planning to add discussion feature to React testing library. I think Nick came in here. Yeah. Oh no, that's a different Nick. Yeah, Nick serve. Here we go. I think it might be a good idea, but I'm not really managing that project anymore. Yeah, as Tiger said. And yeah, if you are using any of the testing libraries, then definitely jump on the Discord because it's a hip happening place for testing library stuff. Okay, Nick is asking recommendations on project structure. Tiger suggested that the Bookshelf app is a good example, and yes, it is. It's exactly how I would structure a project of the size of Bookshelf. When things get a little bigger, then my structure kind of maybe a little bit different, but the basic idea is React folder structure .surge.sh, I think. Maybe that's it. No, rats. I can't remember. File structure, maybe. Yeah, there we go. Move files around until it feels right. This is not a joke. I don't know, maybe somebody already replied with that one, but that's kind of my approach to it. I realize that this doesn't may not jive very well with you, especially if you're trying to like guide a team in the right direction or something. But that's kind of like, I used to have this whole structure thing to make things work in a certain way, but yeah, it was too much work than it was worth. Now, like I would recommend that you use a meta framework that has a recommended file structure anyway, where you have routes, like a route directory or something, or pages or whatever. And so you just follow the structure that they offer. And that ends up working pretty well, I think. Yeah. So I'm with Dan on this one. If you're just doing like a create React app like we are in Bookshelf, then one thing that I find is people tend to break out your files a lot. Just make tons of files that are really small. I tend to go the opposite, where I try to make my files as big as they can be until I just can't stand it anymore. And that ends up making the question of file structure just a lot easier to answer. So I don't know how to say your name. It's Gi or Giaki. I'm sorry. But yeah, Jackie, cool. Jackie, if you want to, you can just unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, if you don't want to unmute yourself, that's fine. You can comment in the Discord.
Hey Ken, how are you?
Great. How are you?
Great, thank you. I'm still, trying to get better at React, and I just have a question about some state management architecture. I'll make it short.
Sure.
So I'm trying to create something that's like a similar to a quiz app, where you can't get to the next question until you finish the current question.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say if I have a collection of 10 items and we have to get through those items in order, right? I get the data from the API as like a single collection. I'm just wondering, how do you able to create the state management architecture where it forces you to complete like type in a sentence first before, or like answer a question first before you can go to the next one. And should I make it into like state management, or should I use like URL to manage this? If I'm not sure if, like that, if I did a good job asking the question.
Yeah, I understand. So what you're talking about is a state machine. Really, like pretty much everything's a state machine, is what they like to say. But it's when if you were to model it with something like X state, then that could help with making sure that people can't get into a question that they aren't allowed to answer yet because they haven't answered all the questions. But even like if you didn't want to go into something like X state here, and actually let me put this in the Discord. If you don't want to go with something like X state, you could implement this using derived state. So you've loaded in the questions from the back end, and then you have the state from the UI. And you could write a function that says, what is the next question that I need to have an answer to? And that's the one that you display. And you just make it based on that, based on that derived state that they can't, you don't display a question that's later on until they've answered. Like, so you just find what's the last question they answered, I'll display the next one. And actually, I do this in the same sort of thing in the onboarding, which I'm not going to open up because people are giving their emails in here and stuff. But these onboarding channels, when you join the Discord in the first place, the bot does this exact thing. Every single time you send a message, the bot goes and just looks through every single message that has been sent, and it finds the last question that was answered, and it will then send the message for the next question. And so that's how it knows what order or like the answers to the different questions and things. And you notice that actually the bot responds when you set an answer, it will respond and restate your answer because I use that to determine what your answer was. And there's a bunch of other interesting things about like editing responses. And if you edit it in a way that makes it invalid, then it won't let you proceed. But all of it comes down to being able to derive state from the state that you know you have. And I do have a blog post about this conceptually, just don't sync state, derive it. And that might be helpful to you as well. Hopefully that helps answer your question.
Yeah, I think you sent me to a good direction. I just want to know where I can look to figure it out. But thank you, Ken. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck, Jackie. Cool. Okay, I'll just keep going through here unless somebody has a question here in the in Zoom. Feel free to interrupt me as always. Okay, let's see. Oh, right. I don't know how to say your name. Is it Jelt?
Yeah, it's Jelte, but in
Jelte.
English it's Jelty, I guess.
I'll try to say it the right way. So Jelte.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Good. Okay, so this is in Build an Epic React App, exercise 3 about data fetching. And in this exercise needs to be done when a book is searched. Oh yeah, so this is question as old as time. Should we do our network requests in the event handler or in a use effect? So I know some people on the React team say just do it in a event handler, and I disagree with them. I think that in general, you should try to do all of your side effect stuff in use effect if you can manage it. And the reason is if you do your if you do side effect stuff in event handlers, there's no mechanism for cancellation or for handling race conditions. So like, for example, let's say that you did a search and that search happened to take a really long time for the backend to handle. And then you do while that request is going, you do another search and that one doesn't take a long time. And so that one comes back first. And the user's looking at it and they're like, sweet, this is exactly what I wanted. And then the other one comes in and so you update you set your query or you set your whatever, like your status and set your data on that other one. And they're like, wait, I was looking at what I wanted. And then you gave me this other thing that was like that old query. So if you do it in the event handler, there's no way to manage that. Unless you you could add some additional state and then but it's way more complicated if you do stuff like that. Let me pull up the example so I can show you how you would handle that situation with use effect. So we'll go to the Bookshelf app, open up code, and we'll go to exercise 3. Okay, so this is on our Discover page, I think. And we'll just look at the very final version of all this. So yeah, in here, what you could, well, things get a little bit kind of funny with these extra abstractions. I don't want to dive that deeply into this. So let me go without the abstraction first. So here we're saying, hey, client, go get the books with this query, and then we'll take that response data and set that. Okay, so all that you'd need to do is you'd say let current equal true, and then you'd return your cleanup function. You'd say current equals false, and then you'd say if current, or if not current, then just return. And that's it. That's how you handle race conditions with use effect.
Yes.
Yeah, so good luck doing that in an event handler. I honestly don't know why. It's Dan Abramoff. He's like, yeah, just put it in the event handler. But you tie yourself into this situation where you just can't handle these things. And then on top of that, like cancellation as well. So if we wanted to build cancellation into our client, which we don't have, but we could add like a cancellation token and stuff. We could cancel that in our cleanup function. So we sent a request and then they changed the query on us. So we want to cancel that request. We don't want to bother parsing the JSON that comes back and all that. We don't want to make the browser do all that work. So we could cancel that request in here. You can't do that with the event handler. It's just not, I mean, you can make it work, but it would involve a use effect to make that work. So yeah. Just much stronger feelings toward going with the putting it, all of the side effects should go into a use effect.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I thought it was a bit of an extra step to do the use effect, and also because of that, you also have to do the queried and set queried.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't take that into consideration.
Yeah,
so
yeah. It's a good question, and it's probably something that I should mention in the instructions, because I think it's the natural thing for most people want to do. And so yeah, if you want to like open an issue or something to remind me to add a little note about this or something, or you could even like make a pull request yourself and add something, because your question is probably not unique. I'm sure there are a lot of people who are kind of like, oh, that's kind of interesting.
Cool. Yeah, I will do that. I will make a pull request. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
I also have a follow-up question. I was wondering, you used the use async hook, but you see, yeah, most of the time people use like a use fetch hook. So what is the reasoning behind it that you choose use async hook instead of use fetch with URL?
So have you taken the advanced React hooks workshop yet?
Yeah.
Okay, so you remember, I think it was this one where we build, I think it's this one where we build that. Yeah. You remember building it? Yeah. So you're right. We absolutely could create a use fetch hook, and then you just pass the endpoint that you want to hit and maybe the data you want to do. So there are a couple of problems with that. In particular, like, well, here I need to have a place to type code. Let me pull this back up. Never should have closed it. So if we go to our utils hooks, here we go. So here's our use async. So if I wanted to make a, here's a component that's using a use fetch, and here's my endpoint, and here's my options. So like I'll have maybe I want to do a post. So method is post, and maybe I want to do a well, just from that, typically you don't want to do a post on render, like you want to do a post on demand. So in this case, you'd have a run of some kind, and then in your event handler, or hopefully more likely in a use effect, based on some state, the user triggers some reason that you want to do this. Then you'd say run with your stuff and whatever, and that would be like make a post at that endpoint. But let's say that it's not a method of post, and here you're getting the user data or something, and now here's our data, which then we'll also need to have a status that is like loading or whatever. So in this case, that would work fine. You may also want to say like, I don't actually want to run this right away. So enabled is false. So it won't run until I call run explicitly, in which case, like, it's still not that much more of a benefit on top of things. And then what if this user data actually comes down to a book with a book ID? And so now this is depending on some state, but let's say this is a use, this is going to be stored in our state. So this is going to be our book ID, and our initial book ID is null. Okay, so now you actually don't want to do that. So that's where the enabled if false comes in. But then when you actually do want to run it, how does this book ID, or how does, well, I guess, yeah, the use fetch would have the latest, and you just always use the latest string there. Yeah, so
the way I used use fetch before, but it was not for post request, so I don't return a run function from the use fetch, but just do the fetch in the use fetch loop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it just returns the data.
Yeah. Yeah. So like as we're saying here, like it's totally possible. And of course you've done it. So naturally it's possible. And there are like at least 30 NPM modules that do this. For me, use async is not about actually performing the async task. It's more about managing. Oh, somebody just drew on my screen. Don't draw on my screen, please. It's more about, I don't know how to get those annotations clear. There we go. No, clear all drawings. Please don't draw on my screen. Yeah, so use async is more about managing the asynchronous state than it is about performing the asynchronous action, which makes it more generally useful. In particular, on the shoot, it's the tool. No. What is it? There's a component in here. Status buttons. Here we go. And so we have a tooltip button on the status buttons. Just let's all go to the bookshelf app, and we will see these are status buttons right here. And so when I click on this, then we get a little spinner, and I click on it again, the spinner shows up. And so use async is managing that async state. So what's interesting is that this actually combines React Query with use async, where React Query is responsible for actually performing the interaction. But React Query, when I use this handle remove click or the mutate function, this is coming from React Query. Like this is a hook built on top of React Query. So mutate actually returns a function, and all the use async is doing is when we click or when we say run on click, this is going to get the function or the promise that React Query gives us, and use async is just telling us what the current state of that promise is. And so what's nice about that is it allows me to give some UI based on the state of that promise, and use async doesn't actually care what that promise is actually doing. So it just makes it a little more generically useful. Maybe it could be a little more terse if we just use fetch for stuff like our discover page here, which actually we refactor this quite a bit, and eventually it's all put into React Query anyway. So yeah, maybe we could terse it up a little, or like just tighten it up a little bit if we had to use fetch. The other thing is like you could build use fetch on top of use async, where use async can manage all the asynchronous stuff, and use fetch is just like basically it's like use client, where it just manages making requests with the client. I don't think it would save us a lot of work, but it could save us a little bit. So yeah, anyway.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. It's more general. It's can be any async action actually, huh?
Yeah.
Not only API requests.
Yeah, exactly. So you could use it for like requesting Bluetooth access or all that stuff too. Cool. Thanks for the questions.
Thank you.
All right, sweet. If anybody else has questions in here, feel free to interrupt me, but I'll just come back here to Discord and keep it on. Okay. Actually, we reached where we got to at the start of this, but we've gotten a couple other questions. So let me see what we can do about these. Any advice on how to work out the JavaScript logic for a website, or any advice to practice JavaScript most efficiently? Having trouble figuring out what logic should be for things like an e-commerce site. So this is kind of like correct me if I'm wrong, but this question is more like, how do I get experience as a JavaScript engineer? And I do actually have a blog post about this, and it is how to get experience as a software engineer. And people seem to have enjoyed that. But in general, this is kind of you just need to spend a lot of time practicing. And there's actually a good how to React. Here's a good way to get into React, if that's something that's interesting to you. And then there's also in how to React, I mention JavaScript 30, which is and beginner JavaScript, which is not free. But JavaScript 30 is totally free by Wes Bos. Front-end Masters also has like an intro to web programming, if you're just getting started into the web stuff. Eventually I plan on making something like that myself, but that's like years into the future. So we'll see when that ever happens. But yeah, it comes like, I can give you these resources and stuff, but it all comes down to, you just got to spend a lot of time doing this. And when you get to, or like over time, you'll develop the intuition to know how to work out JavaScript logic. As far as like practicing JavaScript most efficiently, it comes down to actually building real things. Don't just follow tutorials all the time. You got to actually build something. And if you're not sure what you want to build, then I think actually cloning existing things can be really helpful, because it allows you to avoid, what's the word I'm looking for? Just worrying about the details of the product that you're trying to build, or whatever the solution. And you can just focus on actually building it. So yeah, like if you're going to build a Twitter clone or something, you don't have to decide, should I implement edit or something like that. Maybe you should. But anyway, hopefully that's helpful to you. And I'm sure that several folks in the community can also help with that advice. I don't know if that'd fall under career or general, but you could probably post it to either one of those. Good luck. Gabriel is asking, I saw you using Screen API with your React testing library. Is there a reason to use that? Yeah, actually, I've written about this, Gabriel. It is common mistakes with React testing library. And specifically, it is not using screen. Here we go. And I will link you straight to that straight away. There you go. So yeah, basically it comes down to having like, well, it's easier if I've got a place to write code. So if we go, shoot. New JavaScript file. Okay, so let's say we've got our render thing. Okay, I'm using Quokka. Don't ask. It says it right there. I'm using Quokka. So here you got your get by text, and so you're going to say get by text thing, and then you're like, oh wait, no, actually, or maybe it's submit. And then you say, oh, wait, no, actually I need to get the submit button, not the, like, maybe there's a text that says submit the thing or whatever. I don't know. And so then you're going to come up here and you're going to say get by role. And then you'll update this, get by role. And the role is button. And the name is submit. That's a lot of extra work. What if instead of all that, here, we'll just comment this out. What if instead you say render thing, and then you say screen, get by text, submit, and then you're like, oh wait, actually no, I don't want get by text, I want get by role button with the name of submit. It's just a lot easier. You don't have to worry about updating your destructuring up here. You could give this a name. You could say whatever, and then say whatever dot thing. I think in here we recommend calling it view. So what I recommend here, a lot of people use wrapper as a variable that you give back from render, but wrapper is old cruft from Enzyme. There's no reason to call this wrapper. It's not wrapping anything. Don't use wrapper. If you call it anything, don't use wrapper. I recommend destructuring. But if you do want to give it a name, then you could call it view. And so here we could say render is view, and then you'd say view everything. But then like in every single test, you've got that stuff. It's just so much easier to say render and then screen everywhere. So it makes it easier for you to copy paste things in different places or whatever. So that's why I recommend going with screen. Okay, cool. And
Hey, Ken.
yes, hi.
I have a quick question, hopefully quick.
Yeah.
I'm working with a new like library and API where you instantiate a client and you interact with that client via listeners and all sorts of stuff. But obviously you only want one of those clients in your app.
Okay.
I'm currently approaching it by like instantiating it in context and using that as like where I'm grabbing it from. But I've also seen it where you create a class with like a static instance. And so you call like a function like, oh, does that get instance? If it exists, return it. If not, create it and return it.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if there's like any reason to err on one side versus the other.
Yeah, well, help me understand the reasoning for only wanting one instance.
I think that's just the recommended approach, or at least that's how I've seen this API used, is like, oh, here's the one client instance and that's what's used.
Got it.
So yeah, I'm assuming that it's poor practice to like have a bunch of them floating around.
Yeah, like that's something you want to enforce, is like make sure there's only one.
I think so, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still sort of figuring out the API, so like maybe it's
sure.
necessary, but yeah, it seems that's usually the case.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. So there, like, you just need to know some like when we're deciding between should I put it in context or should I put it as like just a module that you import. The first thing to know is that like putting it as a module that you import is always going to be easier. So when you put it into context, it's not hard, but it is a little bit of extra work. If you definitely only want one instance, and actually the other question is, will this ever be server rendered? Like is this, yeah, it happens on the server. So
sorry, no, I was like, oh, I'm listening.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, it's not server rendered.
Yeah. So if it never will appear on the server. So the reason that I ask that is if it appears on the server, then you have to start worrying about different requests interacting with the data that's in that module, which is, you don't want to have that problem. Because like request from user A comes in and request from user B comes in. Now they can talk to each other's data. That's not good. So in that situation, you always want to use context. But if it's client only, then you can absolutely put it in as a module. The difference there is if there's state inside of that client that that components need to be updated based on. So like that, I don't know like exactly what's going on, but if that's the case, like something in here gets updated and these need to re-render, then putting it as a module that people import makes that very difficult. And it's much better to make it into context, because then you can use state and then people consume that state changes, they re-render. It's just, it happens. Otherwise you have to start doing like use effect subscriptions and stuff like that to make things work if you do it just as a module, which is not as fun. So that's another thing to consider. But if it's just like a client to make requests and there's never any changes to that client, it's just basically like a helper function, but you need to configure it ahead of time, and that's why you create an instance, then yeah, that could just be a module thing, and that wouldn't be a big deal. So you'll notice, is this client like an API client that you're making requests or something? Is that what this is?
No, it's basically like, it's Twilio, so it's like
I see.
Yeah, so it's like the client, and then through the client you interact with different pieces of that client to get the data.
Yeah, and you know all of the like API keys and everything that you need to provide it when the app starts, right? Before you even render or anything. Yeah, so with that sort of thing, I I'd probably just go with the module thing. I
Okay.
wouldn't bother putting that into context. That it seems
then-
like that'd be a lot easier.
Yeah, but then use context to sort of like manage all that state.
Yeah. So like when they're, in fact, I'm not sure. I've never used the client Twilio API. I do use the Node API every single day. Actually, I have an app that I use every day for text messages with Twilio. It's awesome.
Oh,
But I'm wondering if maybe you can hook React Query up to that, so you don't have to worry about managing the state.
yeah, that's also in my mind, is like if that's the direction to go.
Yeah, so that's what I would investigate first. But even if you don't go with React Query, using that use async hook from Epic React, probably that would be my next step. If React Query didn't work, that would be the natural next thing, just to manage the asynchronous state.
Cool.
So
Thanks.
yeah, thanks for your question.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. Marcos is asking, kind of broad, have you ever seen yourself in the need to mapping children deeply? Is this something you would avoid? Yeah, I definitely understand this question. This would be like a, let's see, advanced React patterns. In our compound components, the initial solution that we go with is to map over all of the children so that we can do something to them or whatever, provide additional props. And that's how we enable this API. For the extra credit, we also make it so that you can pass arbitrary children and stuff. And then we have a flexible compound components that takes this a step further to go with context. And that's actually what I would recommend. So I would recommend avoiding doing deep mapping of children, in large part because if you are, and this is why I actually pretty much never go with this approach. In fact, when I update this workshop, I'm probably going to remove this entirely and just recommend using context all the time, because it's not that difficult and it actually ends up, yeah, it's just better. But yeah, so the big thing is with mapping over children, you don't get to see, like, if one of the children happens to be a custom component that then renders one of your needed components, like in this case, it would be another div or something. So maybe you put a custom component and that thing does some logic or something and then returns a div. When you're mapping over these children, you don't get to see what that component does. Okay, so you don't get to see what that. So like even doing deeply nested doesn't quite communicate it effectively, because you don't get to see what that component is going to render. All you see is that, oh, they're rendering this component, they're giving it these props. Who knows what that component does? Not me. So I would generally avoid trying any sort of API that does like mapping of children deeply, or even just mapping of children in general. I teach it this way to get us set up and ready to talk about flexible compound components, and I generally recommend that approach instead. There are some situations where this might be useful, like, for example, if you don't want to allow people to provide their own wrapper components or whatever. But I just don't see that as being super practical, or yeah, I don't see a lot of situations where that's useful. So that's why I'm probably going to remove this. So in general, mapping over children is just dangerous, because it, if anybody decides that, like, oh, I've got this block of code, I'm using it over here, I'm going to just make another component, you've totally busted the mapping thing when you do something like that. So yeah, good question. It's interesting.
Thank you for your answer, Kent, as always.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, Jay-Z is asking, oh, they're asking Ken. That must be for somebody. No, just kidding. My name is Kent, but that's okay. I get that all the time. In fact, I more often get Dodd as my last name, but it's Dodds with an S. So Ken and Dodd is very common misspelling my name. Do you have a blog post about how to map out state management architecture for any front-end project? I do have a blog post. It's it doesn't really talk about mapping out state management, but I have some things that might be useful. So I've got the state blog post, and then another one, collocate state. Those two probably, would be pretty helpful to you. So good luck with that. Okay. Atish, I think I saw you in here somewhere. Maybe you left. Oh, yeah, no, there you are. Hi. I just wanted to understand. I'll just read your question here really quick. I just wanted to understand your view on micro front end. Any suggestions from where to start? Tried single spot, not happy with it. So I have no experience with micro front ends. But I do have close friends who are the authors and maintainers of Single Spa, which you mentioned. And actually, in my podcast, I interviewed one of them about this. Oh my goodness, that's hilarious. I hadn't thought about the fact that funny SEO juice on Single Spa. So this would be my natural first recommendation. But as you mentioned, you have already tried that and you weren't happy. I mean, maybe this will be helpful to you. This is more about like microservices for the front end. So not specifically about Single Spa. So maybe it'll be helpful to you. But yeah, I have zero experience with micro front ends. I do have experience with migrating apps from one framework to another, but not with going for, just the micro front ends approach. Like here's an app and here's an app and they're kind of sharing stuff. I've always just been like, here's an app and it's big.
Yeah, but I just want to understand, what do you think? Is it a good approach to follow a micro front end approach? Is it maintainable, or like, having a one single big front end app is also not that challenging?
Yeah. When I was at PayPal, every app or every team had their own app. And you would it was kind of, it leads to an interesting user experience, not in a great way, because it means that here's this team's app over here and they're working on this thing, and you've got nice page transitions and stuff. And then if you want to go to a different part of the app, you're going to do a full page refresh to get over here to this other part of the app where this other team has nice page transitions and everything. And so there's a loss of cohesion across these different boundaries. And there's no, even if they're using many of the same libraries, they're going to be different versions and stuff. So that you don't benefit from caching as much. And there are things that you can do at an organizational level to deal with all those problems. But I think that Single Spa kind of helps, or just the idea of micro front ends kind of helps with that. Actually, if you want me to talk about Remix, I think Remix might actually help with this a little bit too. But as a general practice, I think that it just is another thing with trade-offs, just like everything else. And it comes down to what are the trade-offs that you're willing to manage. And with PayPal, it was just full page refreshes were just like how things have always been done. And so when we started doing more client-side stuff, it was never really a big problem that there was a full page refresh to going from one part of the app to another. And the other trade-off that you're making, if you want to start sharing caches of chunks and dependencies and stuff, now you have to coordinate across teams what version of React you can use and stuff like that, what version of React Router you can use. And with Single Spa, I think you get some of that, but you also have the option to use a different version, in which case you wouldn't share the cache of that library. So it's trade-offs up and down. I can't say that it's a bad idea. It just has different trade-offs. If I were at PayPal today, I don't think that I would want to use up my developer goodwill capital to convince every team to start using Single Spa. That would just be an enormous effort. There are so many other boxes I'd like to check off before I'd get to doing something like that. And also the problems that it solves, I don't think would be worth it in that at that scale. So I don't know, but like I said, I have zero experience with this. So, but that's just my first impression.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Sure. What would be the use case for bringing in some global state library? Yeah. So like this is like why should we ever use a global state library? React query is kind of like a global state library, right? But it's a server cache. You know, when we talk about state, it's kind of an interesting discussion. It depends on how you define different terms of what state even is. So yeah, I mean, I can see use cases for things like Jotai for managing atoms of state, so you can have much more granular control over like this part of the app, or like we've got 1,000 of these components and they're all subscribed to this thing, but they only care about like a piece of that store, and so we only want to re-render in that case, you know, for performance reasons. And like really, when we're talking about co-locating state, putting your state in the global namespace is technically co-location if the components that need it are in entirely different sides of the app. So like when we're talking about state co-location, you have a component, it has its own state, and then, oh, this component next to it needs it, so we'll move it to the least common parent. And sometimes the least common parent is going to be the app root. And so that then all of a sudden your state is global. Now, whether you need to bring in a library to manage that, I don't think so. The only time where you'd really need to bring in a library are if it's a performance problem. You've got like many consumers of this component or of this context. And in that case, it's actually two things: many consumers and many unnecessary re-renders that are causing performance problems. If you have those two situations, then bringing in something like Jotai can solve the problem. If you have the situation where you have many consumers and every single one of them needs to re-render when that state changes, I don't know what you can do to solve that, other than like trying to find ways to like if the renders are necessary and there are just so many and it's very slow, then just finding ways to optimize it somehow. I don't know how you would optimize something like that outside of stepping out of React a little bit. But there aren't very many like, I don't know of many cases where you have many consumers and all of them need to re-render with every state change. I just don't know of many cases like that. But there may be some, and maybe React isn't the right solution for that particular thing. You might need to step outside React for that. Yeah, so I mean, some people really like particular ways of interacting with a state that's in context. So like you can use immer to make it easier to update the state or something. You could use Zustand for managing that state and just like creating those contexts for you and stuff. I know like Tanner Lindsley is really happy with Zustand. Yeah, but I don't know. I just don't think that you need it to be successful. I think if you follow the advice that I give here in my context blog post on how to use React context effectively, then I don't think that you need to have an external state management library. You can, and they're, you know, so long as you use them wisely, they won't be a bad thing necessarily. But I mean, every abstraction comes with a cost. You can't avoid that, and so you have to make sure you're making up your investment at least. Okay, we got a question with Code Sandbox, so that's exciting. It's line 13. Okay, and this is a counter. We have some use effects for an interval. We're keeping track of the latest version of a callback, and that's interesting. Interesting approach there. So stuff like this, it's kind of hard because I just rewrite this to something that might be outside of the requirements on whatever it is that you're trying to build. But yeah, let's take a look. So we've got account that's incrementing, or that's, yeah, incrementing every second. I don't know, like it's hard for me to answer this without just saying, well, why don't you just move this set count into here? But yeah, so the question is about line 13, why it's needed. Yeah, like, so assuming that we change nothing, and like there's some good reason to have the code the way that it is, which, by the way, this is not how I would write this, but let's just assume that this is what we need to do. If we don't do this, then you're going to have a problem where, well, actually, here, let's, we'll put this right here as well. Okay, there we go. There we go. Well, here. Okay, so we don't have that that line in there anymore. We are still getting this incrementing.
Hi, Kent.
Hi.
So yeah, hi. So I am the one who posted that. So the quick background on it was just a very quick time. So I looked at the blog post of Overreacted.io, where I pasted the link in the below chat. There I saw that Dan explained like how this at the bottom, complete bottom. That was my last. Yeah. So here it is explanation like why to use that. I used in a different way, like creating some ref and setting that like that dot current equals to so and so timer. Then I used to do like a clear interval of that ref dot current, and that worked for me. Then I came across this article where use interval custom hook was written, and this was explained over there, but I could not get my brain over there like why it was written like that.
Got it. Okay, that's yeah. Well, so what you have here is a few steps away from what Dan has in here. So what he's trying to build is a generic use interval hook. And so what you're asking about is, why do I need that? Is that right?
Yes, because I saw somewhere in one of in some YouTube videos where they're trying to build custom hook to identify whether user clicked outside the model or not. There they use the same pattern.
Yeah, okay. So this is actually a pattern that I'm going to include in the Advanced React Patterns workshop, and when I update it, because it is a pretty common one. And I feel like I really should write a blog post about this pattern, because I've answered this question on Office Hours a couple of times. So that means it's a good question. Don't feel bad about asking it again. So let me think how to explain it again. So maybe I just need to bring this in into here so we can play around with the code a little bit and I can demonstrate what's going on. So we'll say use interval. Oh, wow, this is kind of weird. Hold on a second. Oh, because I'm on the embed. Here, I'm going to jump out of this thing. I think this will take me there. There we go. Sweet. And we'll go ahead and fork it. Okay, and before I forget, I will paste my version of this thing in here. Okay. So let's bring in that use interval again. And instead of all of this stuff, say use interval with the callback. And our delay is 1 second. There you go. Okay, so it's working. Let's get rid of this. Okay, so if we get rid of this, and well, actually, the natural thing to do when you're building this use interval hook is to just call the callback. No reason to save it in anything here. So we'll do that here really quick. Oops. Okay, so we'll just call the callback. And now you'll notice that we increment to 1, but then we don't do anything again. Let's see if we are actually calling the callback. So I'll add a console log for the callback right here. And here you'll notice we're getting incrementing on that callback. I'll bump this up a little bit so we can see that. So it is calling our callback, but it's saying set count +1. So the only logical thing that's happening, or that we can infer from this, is that we're adding 1 to a count, and that is resulting in 1. So count must be 0 every time we call this callback function. So that's not great. Why is count 0? Well, it has to do with closures. So when we render this counter function, React is going to call the counter function, and this is going to create a bunch of variables. So it creates the count variable, it creates the set count variable, it creates this callback function, it calls use interval, and then it returns these React elements. So when we create a function in JavaScript, we're creating a closure. And what that means is any variable that's within the open and closing braces of this function, so within the scope of this function, any variables are going to be referenced, and they're going to be kept in memory as a special a special function or variable that this function can access when it's called. And so every single time this is called, JavaScript is going to look at this and it's going to say, okay, let me go look up that variable over there to see what that value is. Here's an important thing to know about React. These values, this count variable that's hanging out in memory, will never, ever, ever, ever change. It never changes. The only time you'd see a change in the count value itself is when you re-render. And at that point, it creates a different variable, totally different variable from the one that we had before. So that initial count will always be 0. It will never be anything else. And then when we re-render, we create a new variable, totally different variable, and that count is 1. And then you render again, that count is 2. And so you're going to have a bunch of variables. And so because of that fact, this callback that we created, that's also going to be hanging out in memory, and it's going to be pointing to this variable that we created with it, where the count is 0. And so we have this callback that's hanging out in memory. We're passing that on to use interval. And remember, this callback has a closure where the count is 0, and it will always be 0. It will never be anything else. This callback count will always be 0. So when we come in here and we say, hey, let's use this use effect, and we'll have this tick that calls this callback. Remember, that callback, the count will always be 0. So every single time this tick happens, we're going to call the callback again and again and again, and it's going to be 0 every time. And so that's why we're seeing this this thing happen. Now, we can actually solve this for this particular case, because set count supports a state updater function. And I have a blog post about this that I'll share about state updater functions. But basically what this means is I can say, hey, I want to set count, but before but to know what the new count should be, I need to know what the current count is. And so here we're going to say current count, and we'll say current count +1. And now this is going to work because it's always when we say, hey, I want to update the count, we're asking React, what is the current count? And so now we're not using, we don't have a closure over this count value anymore. We're always getting the current count. So that fixes the problem, but that fixes it on the user side. If you're trying to make a generic use interval hook, you want to be able to manage this inside of the hook, so people don't have to worry about stuff like this. They can just always assume that the callback is getting called with or the latest version of this callback is always getting called. That's what we want to do. And so one way that we could do this is, you notice we have this delay with yellow squigglies underneath there. It's because we're breaking the exhaustive depths rule in ESLint. And so and the reason that's happening is because we're using this callback, and React is saying, hey, just so that you know, you're trying to synchronize the state of the world with the state of your app, but the state of your app can change and the state of the world won't get updated. Specifically, this callback variable that you're using, that can change, but I'm not going to rerun this use effect because you're not passing it as a dependency. And so let's see what happens when we do this. I kind of, yeah, this, this technically it still works, but what's out here, actually, we'll console log in this use effect. Okay, So here we'll see that use effect is getting called every render. And so what's happening here, I'm going to get rid of the callback because that just freaks me out that it gets called every render. So what's happening now is, yeah, okay. So now use effect is no longer getting called because the callback's not in there anymore. But what was happening is we re-render the counter. We're creating a brand new callback function. We pass that into use interval. And we said, hey, React, anytime the callback changes, we're going to need to call this use effect again. And so it's like, okay, cool. So I'll call this again. But before I do that, I need to call the cleanup function. So we clear the interval, and then we create a new interval on every single render. This will have some, this will be problematic depending on what the delay is and what you're expecting the user experience to be. So this is not what you want to do. But that's what you have, or that's what you need to do if you want the callback to be whatever the latest version of this code is. And the reason that you want it to be the latest version of the code is because it does close over variables. We've sidestepped this by using a state updater function, but you don't want to have your users have to sidestep your API. And on top of that, if somebody had another thing that was a use state, then and then inside of here, we're like trying to reference that in here, or we're saying console log thing or whatever, then this callback is going to close over the thing value. And so you're still closing over variables. You just happen to sidestep it over here. So that's not a solution either. You can't just say, oh, let's ignore the callback here, because you'll wind up with unfortunate bugs there as well. And so that's a non-starter too. We can't do that. We cannot ignore the callback in here. You don't do that. Don't do that. But you also can't put the callback in its place, because then you're going to be clearing an interval and setting a new interval on every render, which you don't want to do either. So that leads us to our pattern of, I don't know if there's a name for this, and Dan will probably get mad at me if I make a name for it, but I need to have a name for it so I can talk about it. So if anybody has suggestions, I don't know if maybe there already is a name and I just don't know what it is. I don't have to be the one to name everything. In fact, that'd be great if I didn't name it, because then Dan wouldn't get mad at me. Anyway, so this is where this pattern comes in. All that we really need is we need to know what the latest version of the callback is and call that that function. And so every single time this function gets re-rendered, we create a new callback function. Remember, every time in memory, when we re-render it, boom, 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 we're creating new functions. We just need the last one from the last render. But we get that last one from the last render because we're calling use interval. So we always know that the last time use interval was called, it was called with the latest callback. And so if we can just save that callback in place to make sure that we always are calling that one, then we'll be golden. We'll always make sure that we're calling that one. And the way that we save that is with a ref. And so we can say, here's our saved callback. We're going to use this effect to, and this is the one that we're going to use to keep that saved callback updated. And then when our tick happens, we're going to call the saved callback so that we are always calling the latest version, and we don't have to worry about stale closures or anything. And that's why we can just say count +1, and that will work because we're always calling the latest version of the callback. And so therefore the callback always has closed over the latest version of the count. And so that's why this is working. So yeah, I need to write a blog post summing all that up, but did that help clarify things?
Yes, Ken, that clarified a lot of things for me. I never thought of that closure. I read in the blog post regarding closures, but I just left it out.
It's totally there. And actually another resource is what the fork is closure. This is a mirror for the real site, which I will not say because I think that it's inappropriate. But yes, it is. This is a great article. This is also by Dan Abramoff. This whole site, what the fork is.
Don't you, Kent, excuse me, don't you have a blog on stale closures, actually?
Do I have a blog on what?
On stale closures? I think you do.
I do. Or are you saying do I, or are you saying
No,
that I do?
I mean, yeah, I think you do, because I read that and that was pretty.
Yeah, you know what? I
good
think
also.
I do. Yeah, you know, it's on
You
Epic
used
React.
to, at least.
Yes, it's right here. How React uses closures to avoid bugs. Yeah,
Maybe that's the one. Yep.
I think that's the one. So yeah, that yeah, this one, yeah, this one's actually pretty interesting. And here we're using MDX for its actual purposes. It's really awesome. Yeah, and boom, there's the bug right there. You can play around with that. That one's pretty fun and pretty interesting. Cool. Thank you for the question. That was yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for the explanation, Ken. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
I will write about this. Maybe that'll be my blog post next week. I forgot to blog this week. I've done that like twice in the last 3 years, 2 or 3 times, but I forgot this week. So yeah, maybe I'll write about that next week. Okay, cool. Mary is asking if I have a JavaScript course. Sorry, Mary, I don't. I do, however, have a workshop about JavaScript, modern JavaScript. It's ES6 and beyond. And I talk about it in, I think I talk about it in here, or how to React. I think I talk about it in here. Yeah, here at the end of this one, I have the link to the ES6 and beyond workshop at PayPal, which people find to be quite useful. So I will share that with you. But this is only like the more recent features of JavaScript. So I don't get into, yeah, like var and you know, fundamentals of JavaScript programming. But yeah, people seem to like this one pretty well. And I reference it quite a bit because it has a lot of great content. Eventually, I'm going to turn that into a recorded thing like testing JavaScript and Epic React. But man, there's so many things to do. So, okay, cool. Cool, thank you. Have I don't know, Peter, if you're asking me if I've written a blog post about this or if Yago did, but yeah, my state management blog post kind of covers my feelings on state just in general. But yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, latest ref pattern. That sounds right. Latest ref. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that. And then I when if anybody gets mad at me for naming things, I'll just say it wasn't my idea. But I won't throw you under the bus. I just heard about it. Okay, sweet. I'm glad that that was helpful. Oh, and Yago already referenced that. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. That's really nice, Stian. All right. Well, it looks like we're done. We're only 7 minutes over today, so that's I don't know if I call that an improvement or if that's just a fact. Thanks everybody for hanging out. It was fun, and I am planning on continuing this. Our school situation changed recently, so now my kids actually go to school for the full day, and so I no longer have the schedule that I had before, and so I might switch back to going on like maybe Friday mornings. But I kind of like the idea of switching my Fridays and Saturdays so that Fridays are like, I can do stuff on the days that everybody else is working, and that's nice. But yeah, so I may end up changing the day that we do this office hours thing. But in any case, it will continue to be the same in every other way. So you can look forward to seeing recordings if you can't make it. And yeah, that's all I have to say.